So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this SKILup session brought to you by PeopleCert. My name is Cody, and welcome back to this Techstrong learning experience where we've got an exciting panel ahead. Before I let our panelists run away with it, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First of all, we are recording today's session. So if you have to leave early, if you'd like to rewatch, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving a link to access the on-demand recording shortly after we conclude our live session today. Now, if you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options for you to do so. The first option you'll see is on the right side of your screen, and it is the chat tab. So if you see that chat tab, I'd like you to go ahead and start warming that up for us and let us know from where in the world you are joining us. Now, if you do have any specific questions, we do want you to send those into the Q&A tab. Sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep track of all of these questions, and we want to be sure to weave as many of these as we can into our conversation. Additionally, okay, we don't have any handouts for you today, so let's just go straight into our introductions. Our topic today is, of course, continuous testing and test automation. And our panelists today are Mark Hornbeek, CEO and Principal Consultant at Engineering DevOps, Andreas Kronlochner, Senior Transformation Strategist at Tricentis, and leading our conversation today is Helen Beal, Chair of the Value Stream Management Consortium. So Helen, thanks so much for being here. Mark, Andreas, thank you all for joining us as well. Helen, would you like to go ahead and take it away?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much, Cody. As Cody said, my name is Helen Beal. I'm the chair of the Value Stream Management Consortium. I'm also chief ambassador at DevOps Institute, part of PeopleCert. I have a number of different roles. It's lovely to meet you all. I see we've got people coming in from all over the place. Quite a few coming in from the US today. I can see Cleveland and San Jose and Boston and Chattanooga. What a great name that is. But let's meet our panel. So Cody has told you a little bit about them. Let's hear from them. Mark, would you like to kick us off and tell the audience a bit about your journey in continuous testing?
Okay, it's a long journey. I claim it started like 48 years ago. Even as a college student, for some reason, I was involved in a little project. There were several of us, and we had to check each other's work all the time because we were in different classes. So that's where it started. But since then, I've been involved in a lot of different projects that I would now classify as continuous testing. Bell Northern Research many years, and a lot of other places, and more recently as a consultant, and it's kind of my main focus because I think continuous testing is really central to, DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE in general. It's a key part of, continuous quality engineering. So definitely excited about this topic.
It is one of your favorite ones, isn't it? And I like your badge on your hat, your DevOps Institute badge, and you are, of course, a DevOps Institute ambassador as well. So it's awesome to have you here. Andreas, have you been on a journey with continuous testing for 48 years as well, or is yours a little shorter?
Well, not that long. This would exceed actually my lifespan so far, but I've been hanging around in the testing space for quite a while already. So hello, my name is Andreas Kronlochner. I'm based in Vienna. So hello from Vienna. My continuous testing journey started a while ago, or my entire testing journey started a while ago. I've been leading different testing organizations in different industries, telecommunication, insurances, banking, and others, which led me actually ultimately to Tricentis, one of the leaders in continuous testing. And the term continuous testing actually followed me since quite a while, and I was quite eager to learn more and actually apply these methods in there, which are super interesting. And I had many different transformations in different areas, talked a lot to customers, super exciting, very unique situations. Yeah, so there was quite a lot to learn for me as well. Continuous improvement, continuous learning, everything's continuous or continuously, and that's actually a great thing. So roughly in the testing space, around 15 to 20 years, somewhat in between. I didn't count them, to be honest, because they are just numbers and make me feel old. But thanks for having me here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I hear you on the continuous everything. I did a survey a few years ago about DevOps and all the continuouses, because we have so many. I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of them today because they do relate to continuous testing. But we should probably set the scene a little bit. So let's talk about what continuous testing is and what sets it apart from normal testing. So, Mark, do you want to start by giving us your definition, and then Andreas can tidy it up or add anything he fancies?
Okay, well, as you just implied, there isn't really a standard definition, but I think of continuous testing as a quality assessment strategy. So most of the tests are automated and integrated into a DevOps value stream. It's certainly more than automating tests, but it's an essential part of continuous quality engineering. And there are multiple pillars of practices associated with continuous testing. So that's kind of my definition.
Andreas, what would you add?
Yeah, I really like the term of your quality assessment or continuous quality assessment. As Mark said, there's no real definition to it, and everybody has its own version of it. What it means to me and us as a team within Tricentis is it's about automated tests in a delivery pipeline to really assess the risk of an artifact, how you can deploy this to production and get feedback fast. So this is sort of the area we're living in. But if I think a little bit broader about this topic, it's also a mindset for me, like the entire continuous testing, something what you live and breathe, right? What people really do, but per definition, I would say, is about automated tests in a pipeline, enabling you to make decision whether you can go live or not, or ship it to the next stage, right? So this in a fast and automated manner. So this is, in a nutshell, what it means to me.
There's two things I really want to pick up on there. One is the pipeline element, and the other is the human element. So don't let me forget about the human element and the mindset. But Mark mentioned the DevOps value stream. You've mentioned delivery pipelines. And of course, we've also talked about the fact that all these continuouses exist in our DevOps world. Two of the other key ones, of course, being CI/CD, so continuous integration and continuous delivery. And if we look at the definition of continuous integration, we say, well, you've got to have some version control, you've got to automate a build. When you automate a build, when your developers commit code at least daily to trunk, we perform a series of tests. And in the standard definition, we talk about a unit test, an integration test, and a user acceptance test. But are there any other tests, Andreas, that we include in continuous testing?
Yes, we actually do see other tests as well, right? We're speaking, security, for example, is getting more and more of a topic. So we would like to shift any kind of tests to the left and execute them as soon as possible. For example, security testing. We are actually adding more and more load and performance testing to the pipeline as well, and have them automatically executed. So these are two non-functional tests, so to speak, which we see in the pipeline as well, which we need to add just besides the pure functionality. But I see also accessibility testing, for example, quite of a topic, and then not to forget about the user experience. So user experience testing, these kind of topics are quite important from the pure hygienic unit and integration test, which I would say is the foundation or the baseline. But the better we're getting in these topics, the more we can actually add to this one. Like, so one of the benefits from continuous testing is we make room for other topics, for other ideas, to explore other things, making some space for these kind of topics, security, performance, as I mentioned, for example. So this is what we see here.
So it's definitely not just functional testing. There's non-functional tests in there as well, as you say. Yeah,
100%.
Is that the scope that you see, Mark, or are there any other kinds of tests that we should be incorporating in our continuous testing philosophy?
Well, in terms of types of tests, yeah, there's many different types of tests, but it's not just the CI/CD pipeline. I mean, the pipeline has two ends. There's what happens before CI and what happens after CD. So, fundamentally development testing, which could potentially have at least some tests in all the different categories of testing if you want to have a really good quality, start of CI when development is ready. So as much as possible automated, and then deliver to CI a pretty well tested change. And then after CD, all of the deployment type tests, depending on what kind of deployment strategy you're using. And so there's a lot of tests. So
But Andrea,
API testing, I'm seeing a lot more lately, and the more advanced, a lot more of the various types of chaos type testing as well.
okay, so API and chaos also increasing. So Andreas also mentioned that the shift left phrase, so obviously doing things earlier on in the life cycle. So if you imagine a life cycle, and we used to do testing over here, when we say shift left, I know you're probably looking at it the other way around, but we move it over and do it earlier. Shift right is an increasingly popular concept that people are talking about at the moment, and you skirted around that, I felt, Mark. But when we talk about testing in production and progressive deployment strategies, how would you incorporate that into a continuous testing strategy?
Well, that's why I call it a strategy, indeed, right? Because it's not just about shifting left or shifting right. It's about trying to decide where is the best place to do which test and collect the data so that you can use that data as part of your decision process for releases and deployment. So definitely everybody in the whole process, the cross-functional team, dev, QA, ops, SREs, sec, all of those folks have some responsibility for quality and therefore some responsibility for testing. And the general, the optimum situation is you figure out where in the pipeline can you efficiently do a test and have the results hang in there as valid all the way through the pipeline. In some cases, you do need to redo certain tests depending on the configuration of the pipeline and so on. But in general, spread the tests across the pipeline, but early as possible for each individual test.
We've had a couple. Karen.
I can underline this. Actually, I'm a fan of shifting testing activities left wherever it makes sense. Just as Mark said, right, throughout the testing, throughout the entire pipeline, we generate so many data points which actually bring you to the position, do I need to perform this test? Do I actually need to shift right as well? So you learn over time what is needed. I'm not a fan of you need to run all of these tests every time because it's way too much, right? And frankly, I'm not a huge fan of testing in production as well. That's a little bit against my philosophy. Of course, I know sometimes you cannot avoid those things because of super strange limitations and restrictions and whatsoever. But I'm a fan to really execute your tests before you're gonna go live as good as possible. But you're gonna decide on every stage what you're going to test, right? There's no need to test everything. It doesn't make sense every time because it holds you back and you got drawn back for other stuff. So the essence is actually throughout continuous testing, you're generating data points and you get generating possibilities to learn. And this is actually driving you experience and say, okay, I'm going to reduce my test set here. I'm going to skip this test here, or I'm going to add these tests here and fill these gaps in order to deliver real value, right? We're not testing in terms of testing, right? We rather do this in terms of delivering some good quality, good products.
We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, I think, which relate quite nicely to Andreas with what you were just talking about. So the first one I'm going to say is about, it's actually in the chat from participant 383. The question is configuration testing also part of the CI/CD pipeline testing? Do you want to give that a go, Andreas, and then we'll pass it to Mark for his input as well?
Well, I don't think there's a clear definition of this one. Whenever you need to test the configuration, you're going to test it where it's needed. If it's part of your scope, then I believe you could consider this as part of your CI/CD pipeline, whatever you're going to configure. I'm not knowing what you're exactly going to configure. But if the entire configuration has an impact on the quality of your product or of your shipment, then I would definitely consider adding this to your CI or to your testing pipeline and do some testing on this one continuously. If you, for example, experience constantly changes on these areas and configurations or issues which have a root cause in the configurations, then of course I would definitely considering adding this to your continuous testing scope as well. My 2 cents on that one. So rather flexible. I don't know, Mark, your view on that?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. When I think about configuration testing, I'm thinking about, the best practice really is to kind of implicitly test configuration, at least in part, by having some consistent configuration process going on all the way from dev through the, as you transit the pipeline and into deployment. So you try to use the same, deployment methodology, as you're going to use in production, and implicitly you're testing because you're making sure that you're using a consistent environment all the way through the pipeline. But the more explicit type of configuration testing, is also important, at least to be done at some point throughout the pipeline, to make sure that not only the software that's configured on top of the provisioned systems, but also the provisioning of systems as well. So all of that and the different topologies of use of the system do need to be checked at some point. And like you said, to what extent you do that is going to, ideally be risk-based, at least for the typical transit through the pipelines. That maybe you have an all-inclusive testing, certainly before you declare a final, big picture release. Yeah.
So another question from the audience, again, pretty technical, and then I'm going to circle back to that human conversation I wanted to have before we go on to some of the other questions coming through thick and fast today, by the way. This one is about Python. So with Python in some industries being or seeming to become a mainstay when it comes to quality engineering in the CI/CD pipeline, is this preferred over enterprise tools, even low-code automation tools, in your experience? Mark, what are you experiencing there?
Well, yeah, the testing, the language you're using for creating automated testing, there's a lot of different reasons you might choose one thing or another. I mean, Python's are certainly perfectly good language but if you're doing, let's say, test-driven development, you're probably going to use the language that is tied closely with whatever language the code is that you're doing unit level test-driven development with. So if it's Python, it's Python. If it's Java, it's Java, whatever it is, right? But if you're doing application level testing, you can use a standard language, or frankly, the better, more modern, sophisticated tools will abstract that above the level of a programming language to more like, behavior descriptions or model descriptions or things like that. And then you maybe could drive that from Python code or your own framework or some other commercial framework.
Yeah, if I think about Python, of course, I see the rise of Python in different areas, especially in the machine learning AI area. That's for sure. In terms of testing, I didn't come across it too often, frankly speaking, because there's a reason. And actually, I believe in this no-code, low-code solution quite a lot. Of course, there are some special situations which require different coding languages for testing as well. But what I like about the low code and no code is actually that it sort of democratizes testing, right? It's opening testing for way more people, going back to the human component more and more. And I think testing has been suffering quite a while of being a very niche and super specialized people, right? Which is great to some extent. But with the overwhelming number of changes and stuff comes around the corner, I think the more people are better that they are involved in testing. So I want to actually lower the barrier for creating proper tests, where I truly believe that there's huge benefit in Python or other coding languages, but the learning curve is very steep, right? You need to learn quite a lot. So I believe you can onboard more people or get more people to the testing domain if you lower the entry for that. So this is potentially one of the reasons why I didn't come across Python in testing that often so far.
Perfect. And I think you've pretty much answered or said most of what I thought we should say about the human side, in that a continuous testing strategy should also incorporate what's going on in the culture. And one of the things we've talked about for a long time in DevOps is that quality is everyone's job. And as you just said, Andreas, the growing prevalence of low-code platforms means that there has been a democratization of these type of tools. It's lowered the barriers to entry, as you said, and testing is no longer so niche, which is great news. I think that helps us get a long way towards the philosophy of quality is everyone's job. Is that a philosophy? You're both nodding. Do either of you disagree with that philosophy or want to expand on what that really means in a day-to-day operational basis?
Well, it really goes back to, the late, great Dr. Edward Deming, right? This idea of quality is everybody's responsibility. And unfortunately, hate to name names, but Mr. Myers, in his book in the 70s, talked about how it's a conflict of consciousness for a developer to test their own code, and therefore a lot of people have these enormous QA groups, and that's a little unfortunate because in reality that means that a lot of the dev folks think that QA is not their job. So, but the modern thinking and the one that works best is if everybody really truly embraces quality as their responsibility and is supported well by management and the culture to help them understand the science and art of testing, and are supported with training and tooling and all of that cool stuff, and do the best job they can to make sure things are tested and quality is assured.
I'm a little bit torn on quality is everybody's responsibility. I think on a very high level, it's a good thing, right? We also know that teams speak about built-in quality in different frameworks, which is also great, but there's a clear responsibility with that. I think there has been a change in the paradigm in the past, like as you said, Mark, senior management is speaking about quality, right? There's no way to sacrifice this quality thing. But at the other side, I believe that you need to have a clear ownership to the quality as well. It's good that everybody involved in the process, but there must be somebody in the lead. Otherwise, it's a little bit fluffy here and a bit fluffy there, and you need to push really hard for this topic. This is what I recognize, to bring it to the ground and that people are really executing and thinking about this quality. As you said, developers probably they don't want to test, and to some extent, I believe that's okay, right? Because they need to develop new stuff. But on the other hand, they should actually at least get the feedback, is good or bad. So I believe a little bit it's everybody's topic, but it sounds a little bit like, not a clear vision of strategy to me. Instead of, I'm a huge fan of giving a clear ownership to this one and let everyone participate with clear responsibilities. So what's the expectation to my developer? What's the expectation to the business people? What's the expectation to friendly user? You name it.
Okay, so here's where we get into a boxing match, because the best practice is really what I've seen works really well are things like test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development in general, where folks that are developing also clearly have knowledge and are supported with excellent ways for testing. And that's how you kind of bring it together and really make it clear that, when you're writing code or building a system, testing is kind of an equal part of the story. And honestly, a couple of times in my life, I've had access to data for products. And what I found, which is kind of interesting, is that the level of quality produced in terms of customer reported problems is inversely proportional to the number of QA people as a ratio of total population of the development team. That's counterintuitive, right? I mean, add more QA people, quality goes down, generally speaking. Reduce QA team, quality goes up, but only if the developers really have that, not just the responsibility, but the capability, and they're supported with good tools, so that it's not just an extra burden, kind of along the lines of, the platform engineering concepts, where you definitely don't want to just say, hey, everybody do some more testing. They need to be supported well with tools and training and all of that. But that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I agree actually. But this is what I mean about somebody should have the ownership, like really think about the entire process. Mm-hmm. I also believe in this concept, like test-driven development, these things, right? Because they make sense. I just believe, how I see this actually, the tester, however they're going to be, or what role they have, is somehow the ambassador of the customer, right? So really having a big view, and the tester, in that sense, must really know quite a lot in terms of all the different stuffs going on. And it would be just unfair to let him find out everything. So therefore, quality is everybody's job, is a good thing, but not to the full extent, right? So, and I think it's a joint effort that we're gonna do as a team. So distributing this, actually having sort of a common thread to this one, helps definitely improving the quality. And I agree, adding more people or different testing teams to the entire process doesn't bring too much value, right? It's overcomplicating things. This is what we recognize as well. So I don't think we're too far away, right? But for me, important is clear responsibility, and really you need to have some rules and guidelines and guardrails around it to make it happen. Otherwise, it just causes confusion and people don't know where to go and what to do and what the result actually means, right? So I think that's crucial for the entire process.
Yeah, that's a really key point, right? You don't just say everybody do more testing, or everybody take responsibility for quality. It's got to be in the context of some support. The guidelines, like you said, the training, incentives. The whole set of tools and support, not just technical tools, but people tools as well. And if all of that happens, which admittedly is not an easy thing, right? But at that point, you really can have people feeling in their heart, right, that hey, I'm also part of responsibility for quality is equal to the building of the product, because I don't want to build a product that has bad quality, for example. So anyway,
I don't think anybody wants to do this, right? But it's new. It's new.
I do.
Because it's a new responsibility, and actually people, are faced, at least in EMEA, with these kind of topics. The expectation is high that everybody speaks about quality now, right? So people are overwhelmed; they don't know what to do. So I fully agree. It's a top of training with people as well. You need to be sort of gentle to really bring them closer to the topic and tell them what you're gonna expect from them, right? So I think this is also key from that perspective.
We're getting quite a few observations from the audience about this, and actually there's very much a kind of a building conversation around organizational design as well. But before we go to organizational design, let's have a look at some of these observations in a bit more detail. So Mark, one of the points that you made in particular about management support, people are saying that's really important. I've actually asked people if that's something they're really struggling with, and one of the participants is saying it's not a matter of hard, it's more of a not easy, as the management, have two fronts, the business expectation as well as the ideas coming from dev and test. So what does good management support look like, Mark, and how do you get it if you haven't got it already?
Well, let me tell you a quick story. At one point I was a senior vice president over an engineering group. My boss, who was the president, was an engineer at heart, and we used to get along pretty well. And then he left, and they promoted the chief financial officer. He didn't have a clue about engineering, and he would run into my office and ask me why we're spending so much money on quality related stuff, because that's got nothing to do with the product. So certainly senior man, and then he would cut the budget, and then he complained that our quality went down. So it really does require senior management to buy into the fact that quality and continuous testing requires not only initial investment but ongoing investment as part of the total picture of what is done. And they have a role to incentivize that, to give it equal weight with the product. Otherwise you'll end up with lots of stuff on the street that doesn't work too well. So that's my perspective of that. So certainly evangelism, sponsorship, encouragement, incentives, all of those kinds of things are, and maybe just learning at least the foundation level of continuous testing. I think those are responsibilities for senior leadership.
Yeah, I think a good senior leadership should also get familiar with the entire terminology in there. They should be able to formulate clear expectations as well, like realistic ones, right? So bad examples came across these things as well, like absurd high expectations to the automation rates, like in a very short amount of time. So it should be realistic, right? So they should be aware of what's in there, and as I say, investing into the entire thing. Don't cut down the budget on this one because you do not immediately see, for example, the benefit. Because frankly, in some areas, it's pretty hard to craft out the benefit, what the entire quality initiative actually brings. Like, okay, defects going down is quite obvious, but how do you measure the entire organizational development of teams that they can better deliver all those kind of things? So I think people should zoom out a little bit and get a holistic view and get an understanding for the entire topic, instead of, that's a niche thing and you're the testing tool, cut down the cost. So a little bit more of empathy makes a great leadership for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. And also what you just briefly touched on, the visibility of quality and making sure that is visible all the way through the management chain. I agree with that as well. That's really critical. Otherwise, how do the leaders even participate? It's one thing to pontificate and say, quality is important, but if they're not actively engaged kind of continuously through, making things visible and reacting to the good and the bad, then, they're not really going to have the impact.
So ideally what I like is actually some management, senior management, who's actually challenging a bit as well, and throwing in some visionary ideas where to go. I think that's good. And just what you said, Mark, I think transporting the message up and maybe tie this to another business-related metric and say, okay, this improvement is going back to the quality initiatives. I think this would be great to really call those things out as well.
Let's look at these sort of organizational questions as well. This is all linking together, of course, the culture, the mindset, the leadership, the organizational design. So this looks like an organizational design question on the face of it, but it's actually a kind of a technical test question as well. So it's from participant 463. Thank you very much. And participant 463 says, I'm on what team topologies? So this great to see it again on the webinar, by the way. This amazing book from Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace, Team Topologies, pops up all over the place. It's obviously helping a lot of organizations figure out what's going on. But this question says, I'm on what team topologies refers to as an enablement team. We help delivery teams overcome impediments in their DevOps maturity. I've struggled with where end-to-end system testing fits into a continuous testing strategy. These are typically slow, brittle tests that resist automation. Do I tell teams to abandon them in favor of lighter weight testing or resign themselves to manual system testing? So, Andreas, what do people do with these end-to-end system tests?
Yeah, it's a great question and great observation. I like that. I think the end-to-end testing, especially the automated one, have a very bad image, right? Because of the past, and we didn't do a very good job in there as well. They actually tend to be very fragile, high maintenance rate, endless long duration, huge amount of tests, blah, 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 a lot of work, right? So I fully sign this. I think keys there in there that you really think about how you're going to design those tests and what you're going to test, right? I think that's essential to the entire thing. I think there is a need for end-to-end testing as well, because to me, it represents more and more the customer interactions, right? Because the typical customer transaction goes across multiple applications, which are multiple teams, multiple arts, you name it. And it just would be unfair that a single team tests this. So I think it's for us mandatory to have in your testing pipeline as well. But here comes the big but. Knowing exactly what to test, a low number of tests actually, maybe with risk assessed and testing those things first so that you can deliver the output in time. And secondly, we believe that modularity is key in there, right? So that you can assemble test cases from different teams. So teams should deliver artifacts which you can assemble in a pretty fast manner, and you should have centralized points where actually maintain the test cases. So this is what we actually see that this model is working. And we also built a methodology which has an enterprise enablement team in there doing exactly building these frameworks for the other teams that they can deliver these reusable artifacts. Like reusability is actually a key in there. So that's my view on it. But I fully sign it. Has a little bit of a bad image, right? Because we just started from the wrong end in the past, right? So grabbed all the stuff the teams produce, and then we built our end-to-end tests on top of this. I think this is just not how it works, right? It should be assembled from bottom to top. So this is my view on it. I hope this makes sense to you.
Mark started nodding when you said modularity. So what was it, Mark, that he kicked off there?
Well, yeah, I mean, that there are multiple tactics for dealing with large test suites or long duration tests, which end to end is really only one category of those things. But certainly, breaking dependencies at the architecture level is part of the ways you deal with it. So you don't have to do as many large, long tests if you've got confidence that the different microservices or however you break up your system into somewhat independent parts, and it can reduce the need for such tests. Also, the fact that a best practice really is to have your test environments ephemeral and your tests so that they can be distributed, horizontally or vertically scaled to make them run faster in time to time. is another way to deal with that. During the pipeline, you can quickly grab a whole lot of resources and run lots of tests in parallel rather than waiting for them all to run in serial. And some of the long duration tests that are maybe longer than the pipeline allows, you may indeed, relegate those to, testing occasionally. There's different strategies, or maybe put those out as a part of your rollout strategy to test, in production. Depends on the risk of that, of course, but there's a lot of different tactics for breaking up and reorganizing the execution and timing for these large and long duration tests is the point. And certainly modularity is part of that, one of the strategies.
Andreas also mentioned.
On top of this, I would actually add, we've trained our business users as well that they just trust in end-to-end tests once they see those things. So I think it's a matter of trust as well, that those people can rely on these other tests as well and have the confidence in it that, for example, those microservices, the interfaces, that those things are built in a way that they are robust, right? And that they would be willed in reducing the end-to-end tests. Personally, I don't think it's going to go away. It's still part of it, but it's occasionally. I think you need to really take a look at when you test, but also taking a look at educating the business, right? Okay, that they understand which kind of tests we did, and actually maybe they are willing to reduce the number of end-to-end tests because the time to market could be way faster. So I think we need to work on multiple ends in there to get better in that topic.
You also mentioned, Andreas, ARTS, so Agile Release Trains, part of the SAFe or Scaled Agile Framework ways of working. We do have a question from participant 155 about SAFe, and I'm sure we have probably quite a few people on the call today that are using SAFe or another scaled Agile at Scale framework. So the question is, we work in a SAFe Agile framework, however, we have various contracts for PMO, for dev, and many of the dev contracts are resistant to sharing test data and will frequently kick stuff over to their QA testers. How do you see test automation as a means to bridge that gap and get the team to be more collaborative? So this is, again, speaking to this organizational design. Do we have separate test teams? Do we put testers in the teams? What's your experience, Andreas, around how SAFe and test automation work together to resolve these handoff problems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. How to explain this? I think a lot of good things are going on in there already. I think the thing with SAFe is actually it's built in quality, right? So this is what SAFe speaks about as well. Also going to the direction of an ownership. I think key in there is actually that you have these modules and this modularity that allows you to share tests, like, for example, in a centralized repository, so that people can make use of these kind of tests. My experience showed that the kind of testing is quite different across different arts, for example, based on their need, which they actually have, which leads to the problem that those things do not fit together and people cannot make use of other tests, for example, because using different frameworks and different approaches in there. So I believe unifying and standardizing this methodology is actually a big driver in enabling this cross-team, cross-art, cross-department collaboration, however you're gonna name this. I also believe that, people are people. So I rather, for example, take some tests which are already there, which are actually helping me in a particular situation. So this is a very intrinsic motivation of the people as well. Than rather building my tests from scratch. But only if I have the possibility to do this in a very easy and quick way to grab these tests, so to speak, and make them for my own use, right? So once I enable these things like modularity and actually standardizing those things that I can reuse that stuff, I think this is actually really driving the collaboration and improving the entire test set. So this is my thought around this one in the Scale Agile framework.
You had another question, actually, or another comment about Agile as well. And I guess this is kind of where, there we go. With Agile methodology and QA being embedded as part of them, I think that's part of the team. who takes ownership of the overall quality. So, Mark, Agile generally and the Agile philosophy of small multifunctional teams, how does this sit with continuous testing? Is it helping us move forward?
Well, again, I look at it as kind of the big picture, right? I mean, you want to have, just because you're doing Agile doesn't, and I've seen people think it does, but it doesn't take away from the fact you still need to have a product strategy and a test strategy overall, right? You should already, in advance of getting into things like scrums and that, have an idea of where along the value stream or what kind of test going to be done, which particular test. So, the last question, was somewhat similar, right? The handoff problem. I mean, there's multiple places where things could hand off, but you don't want to just hand off blindly. You want to have a structure and a strategy that overall, where who's going to do what tests at what point along the value stream, whether it's in design testing, engineering, testing, integration, deployment, delivery, deployment, or even production. So you still need that strategy. And I'm shocked. I often run these testing classes, and when you get dev and QA together, it's pretty remarkable. A lot of the dev people think, no, I'm not responsible for testing. Why am I here? And then they start to realize, wait a minute, yeah, I do need to care about testing. And you do need to have a strategy so that when QA does report a problem, you're kind of expecting it rather than just complain about, oh, there's QA reporting another problem, right? So they need to work together, within their Agile environment, but also keep in mind the big picture of the whole thing, not only one pipeline, but with SAFe, the idea of overseeing a whole portfolio of value streams and pipelines. You need to have a big picture strategy as well. So it's not a surprise or shocking or disturbing when you don't have these surprises.
We have a comment saying, yeah, I've actually heard multiple of the teams state something to the effect of, we're Agile, we deliver small quickly, so we don't need to test as much. And then they pull out the production, deployment and operational defects report, and they obviously have problems. Mm-hmm. We're getting close to about 3/4 away, and I think the last quarter of today we'll talk about the futures, and we do have a question about futures. But before we go there, we do have a comment about test data, that age-old problem of getting good quality test data, which for me kind of goes hand in hand with the problem of having production-like test environments. So, Andreas, test data, production-like test environments, how do these fit into the continuous testing strategy? And what's the best way to resolve these type of challenges in the current market?
Yeah, test data is actually one of the biggest unresolved puzzles in my personal view. Everybody in testing has been struggling with test data, right? The more applications and teams are involved in the entire thing, the more complicated it gets, and people spend loads of time in generating and maintaining these test data. I think you need to have a couple of different strategies in place for your test data, right? A combination of tools and methodologies, right? You need to have actually your test data fit for your purpose, right? And you need to embed this in your test cases as good as possible. I think one key element is actually deriving your test data from your test cases and have this at a centralized point, which is actually speeding up the entire process massively. This is what we see. We often work with data from production. This helps in many matters quite a lot, but this comes with a lot of effort. Again, I think you need to zoom out and actually create a strategy around this one. You need to have also somebody which is in a clear ownership of your data strategy in order, to be very efficient and effective on building your test data for this dedicated environment without actually taking too much effort on this, right? So for me, it's still one of the things we need to heavily work on. I hope that AI gives us a little bit of push in that area. We have great solutions out there, but to be honest, it's still, I mean, this, it eats a lot of the time of the tester, of the business tester. So I think we can do better on that one. Unfortunately, I don't have any very accurate answer on this one. But I think, again, like zooming out, having different strategies in place is actually key in there, and find your perfect mix of strategies in there, which data you're going to use for your testing.
What about the production test environments? Is that still a problem? Does DevOps help with that by creating less kind of pre-production stages?
Well, I think it's mandatory. It's needed for many scenarios, production-like. I think this is the dream everybody had, tested as close to production. We're really sure that nothing breaks, and I think we need to step away a little bit from that mantra, so to speak, because it's a lot to maintain, right? And you need to ask yourself, whether you're going to spend your effort. Do you want to spend your effort in maintaining your production-like test environment, or do you want to spend your effort, for example, in building new features, testing new features, and bringing out new features in a good quality and impactful features, and actually grow in operational excellence so that you can, for example, repair things pretty fast. So I think we need to step away and actually work on the other side, that by the end of the day, I don't need any production-like environment anymore. So I think this should be the goal we're aiming for, because the other thing is more or less, it comes with too much effort in my point of view. So this is what I experience, like maintaining and building the entire production-like environment with all of the data eats a lot of time, and I'm challenging our customers, our partners as well. Is this really where you want to invest, right? Do you want to invest in people who are running the environment, or do you want to invest in bringing up the quality? By the end of the day, you're not going to need this anymore, hopefully. I mean, that's the vision.
What about cloud, Mark? How has cloud helped people aiming to do more test automation?
Well, okay, so cloud is, this is certainly, if you look at the latest State of the DevOps report, is becoming, recognized as a real, indicator of high performance teams, the degree to which cloud is being employed. In general, it's not really cloud per se. It's like the idea of having an ephemeral, managed ephemeral capability to run your tasks and deploy your applications that is consistent, that you can control, share efficiently, and deploy to. So multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, private cloud, all of those things really are just like elastic infrastructures, and that works well with DevOps, because let's face it, if you've got a small, not risky change transiting the pipeline, you don't need a whole lot of infrastructure to build or test it. But if you've got a risky change or a large change that do happen from time to time, then you're going to want to have a lot more infrastructure, and it needs to be elastic. So you need to be able to grab it, use it, release it quick. That needs to be managed, and not only the provisioning level of computing nodes and networks and storage, but also at the software level. So whether it's containers or immutable tools, but in general, cloud and DevOps go hand in hand. I think you could actually argue, and I think it's beyond the scope of this call to argue this, but I don't think cloud. There's an argument that cloud doesn't have a purpose if it wasn't for DevOps. That's another conversation, but
I think those two topics relate real well, right? So what I recognize when introducing cloud is like, you gotta be fast by the end of the day, right? At some point, if it's not your cloud, you have to deal with the changes, they are coming, right? So your your SaaS provider will actually introduce, like in 2 weeks time, you're on a new version, right? So better test your stuff, reconfigure, rebuild your stuff, whatever it means. Doesn't work with traditional modes anymore, right? So you need to be really fast in that one to fulfill these requirements or these changes as well. And of course, testing plays a big role in there, because actually you customize your stuff, you build a lot of stuff in the cloud. You need to make sure that those things do not break. And at this point in time, it's not even triggered by you, but think about those scenarios or challenges we experience. Like you have processes and you have different cloud providers, different SaaS products in that house with different release cycles. So it's just getting faster and faster and faster anymore. So I think, this could be the reason for DevOps or the other way around. But I think my key takeaway is the more cloud, the more faster you gotta be in that game. With all disciplines like testing, development, whatever it is.
And since we're talking about cloud and the advances that helps us with, microservices has been mentioned by the audience, so perhaps we should have a little chat. And this is kind of leading us into futures, I think, as well. But Andreas, with microservices, is there any new models for testing that people could consider? Can we? This question talks about why is microservices not given a form of testing that looks distributed so multiple servers can share the same data and make for more effective testing? I mean, is testing easier, more difficult with microservices? Are there any patterns we can use to make it more efficient?
Yeah, frankly, not having too much experience on this, we have a couple of customers really heavily relying on microservices. So the issues they were facing is actually that it's a huge amount of services actually, and the entire management and control around this one. And the versioning stuff is actually what makes it quite tricky for them, although it comes with a lot of benefits like those independent blocks and buckets and these kind of things. But the level of complexity it brings into in terms of what to test and really to gain the knowledge and what does this actually mean by the end of the day? Like there are maybe some chains and transactions. It isn't that easy, and I haven't seen any new approaches or pattern to this one by now, which fully cover those things. I think at a very low level we have good testing possibilities in there. But again, I'm taking a look at a holistic view at those things, how to manage those kind of things, and the deepest is I didn't come across very convincing solutions at the moment, to be honest, because of the sheer amount of services people have to deal with, right? It's a complex thing. It can become a complex thing. So this is what I recognized. So is there work needed to be done? I believe there's some space for good solutions, and hopefully we're going to be there soon. And I think there's actually, it's going to be more, right? Because the structure, the architecture is getting smaller pieces. So you need to have a more sufficient or more convincing solutions to that, what I see.
You mentioned AI a few moments ago in the context of strategies to deal with test data. But there's actually, I believe, quite a few different ways that we can apply artificial intelligence to testing. Andreas, what are your favourite sort of AI use cases, and how many of them are real today, or which ones of them are you thinking are coming in the near future or far future?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's actually those things like I believe every tester tried out already and asked ChatGPT about creating a couple of test cases, right? Because it makes the life easier, and it's valid. It's okay. Favorite use cases I've seen so far is actually self-healing or self-healing scenarios, really identifying, helping in terms of root cause, identifying patterns if you're going to run big test cases, and really just speeding up the entire process of identifying what actually went wrong. Because with all of these smaller changes, smaller bits and pieces, there can be many points where the entire thing breaks, right? And if you have a big number of things, you often spend a lot of time in analyzing. So to your question, I believe in analysis because we're getting more tests, faster tests, more high frequency. A sheer amount of data can be overwhelming, and analysis there, I believe there's a big value in the AI that they can help us identifying pattern and maybe taking a look into the future, giving recommendations as well. For example, addressing gaps, for example, in your testing coverage, in your testing strategy, or actually giving recommendations already how to build things better. And I think predictive AI, that's sort of a thing which is quite interesting for the future, like really to be more aware of the risk and really find some ways to prevent those risks. So this is what I see at the moment.
I think that speaks really nicely to what you were saying about the complexity of microservices as well. So that kind of distributed architectural pattern that leads us to observability because of all the unknown unknowns that leads us to AI ops to really help with that RCA, the root cause analysis. So that is a big one. And I very much believe that to be here today. I do some work with MoveSoft as well. I have for several years, and they have lots of very interesting examples of people doing that and have been doing it for a while. Mark, we've actually only got about 6 minutes left, so let's keep talking about futures. I mean, you can talk about AI if you want, Mark, but I just want to get your view on kind of where we're going with this, with continuous testing. What's going to be the things uppermost in people's mind, or what people should be prioritizing over the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, at the baseline, I think more organizations that are on a DevOps, DevSecOps, SRE transformation path are more and more realizing how important understanding and mastering continuous testing and all the things we talked about are. So that's one thing. I think there's going to be an ongoing, focus on continuous testing with all the different dimensions we talked about. As far as specific, strategies and technologies, certainly AI is game changing, and no question about it. I have several teams that are embracing even just the chat GPT as a way to, feed it a document, get the test requirements from ChatGPT. It reduces that effort from days to hours, even with the validation that you need. And then, you go through all the different stages of saying, okay, if those are the requirements, and, what are the tests? And if those are the tests, then can you create the code? And if those are the code, you know what I mean? So you can literally, something that used to take that whole cycle, multiple days is now, hours or a day or two. So huge productivity improvement. It also helps folks that, are great testers, but for whatever reason, they haven't embraced automation. There may be really good exploratory testers, and, AI can help those people without having to learn everything about all the minutia of automated testing. So, and these are just the current generation of AI tools. Of course, practically every test vendor that I'm aware of has a roadmap for AI, integrating AI in one form or another. The latest state of the Software Quality Report 2023 listed out 13 areas where AI is being applied in one form or another. The top 3 was test case generation, test data generation, defect analysis. So, but there's a longer list. So AI is a big one. That would be my number 2. And the last would be this idea, kind of like we said with microservices in general. When you've got complex situations, many products are evolving to their app architecture in the direction of microservices. So a value stream management platform, getting to know that, realizing that there's a layer above CI/CD that needs to be managed, and at least managed, if not automated, preferably even automated. But that, I think, is also becoming more and more important. So those would be my top 3.
Love it. Value stream management, of course, in there. Absolutely. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I think let's wind up with some key takeaways. So, Andreas, what's the one thought you want to leave with the audience today?
Yeah, I would say stay eager. Just following up on the AI discussion, I believe actually that especially quality engineering people, they are super creative in finding new ways in how to deal with the changing environment, right? So the traditional tester has been quite under pressure in the past years with all of these changes, right? You name it. Development methodologies, cloud, AI, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of pressure on those people. So I believe they're going to leverage those technologies pretty good and find creative ways to really do their best and fulfill their job. So I would say stay eager, be open to different and new ways of working, try things out, don't be afraid to fail, but try to fail fast to see how things are doing, but don't fail continuously. That would be bad continuous.
Be eager, be fearless. I love it.
Yes.
Be fast. Mark, you get the final word.
Well, I would just say, in terms of final word, I don't care if you're, a developer, a business manager, QA person, ops person, infrastructure, whatever. I mean, part of your continuous learning should have some allocation for really mastering continuous testing and continuous quality engineering, because it's part of almost everything we do. Certainly, it shouldn't be 100% unless that's all you do, but it certainly should be an explicit part of your continuous learning path. And wish you the best with that, everybody.
Yeah. Wonderful. So thank you, audience, for joining us today to consider the continuous testing and test automation theme. Thank you very much to our panelists, Andreas and Mark. Next up in the DevOps program on the 9th of September is open source toolchain orchestration. So actually that's September the 7th. So we will be sending you a link to that in your follow-up email. Thank you again, Andreas and Mark, for a wonderful discussion today. We're getting lots of people in the audience saying it was very thought-provoking and awesome. So Andreas, would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. It was great fun. Time flies. Thanks for the great question. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
And Mark? Yeah.
Take care, everybody. You're all invited to Puerto Vallarta, and you can play with the chickens when you get here.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Have a good day. See you. Bye-bye.